Mm. Mm. Namaste. This time we're continuing in chapter 27, in the second part of The Life Divine, the Gnostic Being. And we got about halfway through when we last met a Sunday ago. And we're recognizing that this evolution, this leap into a new range of conscious being, carrying us beyond the strictures and the limitations of the mind, had an impact on life. It brought knowledge, clearly. That's why we call it Gnostic. A knowledge of true being, seen behind the appearances to an embedded and abiding reality. It brings an influence that yields sharper, more fluent action, less prone to error. It brings also the power to beatify and to hedonize life, to make life not simply pleasant, but blissful. We saw also that it is this evolving power of knowledge within us, this Gnostic consciousness, a manifestation of a supreme conscious force. And as it meets all existence in all orders and on all planes, it tends to harmonize and impinges even upon the body, so that the effects of this evolution are not simply internal, psychological. They begin to count in the field of matter, in the powers of life. Spiritual awareness itself expands the body's capacity to endure or experience delight. And that's a realization that often obtains at the level of the mind. We step away from identification with the world, with our mental being, and we absorb ourselves into the Atman. But that point of freedom has an aperture available to the mind. And that's one thing. But the Gnostic is more, because the Gnosis has for its parent the consciousness of Chit, the conscious power. And it is instinct with knowledge, but also with force. So it not only sees, but it effectuates what it sees. What it wills isn't potentially done, it is done. But if the parent power is the spirit, still Ananda is the spiritual matrix. All arises in the play of a supreme nature into which the Gnostic consciousness wants and aspires to move from that, from bliss, from delight, from Ananda. So we swing, we flow naturally from knowledge into bliss. And the forms experienced are real, and the will obtained, authenticated. So the peace that may be native to the experience of the liberated sage, escaping the thraldom of mind, is also there in chit tapas, but so is ecstasy, so is delight. And both peace and bliss are intertwined necessarily in the experience of the bliss of the infinite. And in its play, as it manifests in the world, there is experienced a universal glory. The hidden corridors in the divine vision open up for this being with a capital B. So the body is no more purblind. The heart and the vital no longer willful opponents of advance, but true partners. And this leads to a perfection in action. So this consciousness force manifesting in a Gnostic awareness, based in bliss, founded in delight, seeks to act. And that action has a rounded fullness to it. It's contextual. It understands the all as it understands the each. But two things remain for Sri Aurobindo to touch upon in this chapter. If these are the truths that we experience above, what about the answering elements to our nature here? We ascend, but who is the we? Who is the person that ascends? What about the personality? And what about the foundation of our behavior? So Sri Aurobindo turns in this chapter in its closing pages to look at the nature of the being inside and how it conducts itself in the world. The person, he reminds us, is not an ego, not a transient being that grows, expands, exults in its own, or falls into depression because it doesn't get what it desires. It isn't any of these things. The real person is at one with the supreme divine. It is an expression infallibly of true being at its core. So a Gnostic person is one who knows the source of his own being, not as we would know an object and say, aha, that's me, I can pick myself out in a lineup, but actually it flows authentically from within. One is. One doesn't have to know even, because again, we're working in a field here of identity, which is the supreme knowledge, knowledge by identity. So it is not an ego, but a being at one with the supreme, which means not simply a finite, well-defined personality, but something that is in its nature one with impersonality as well. So if it chooses to retire into its vastness, it becomes the impersonal existence which is spread broadly. It becomes the unsupported self-definition of Brahman, of Para-Brahman. Two, it can succinctly reduce itself into a living embodiment and never lose its placement in that impersonality, can swing back and forth from one poise to the other because both are real poises of a real being. And this impersonality can freely take up the expression of becoming in time and space. The divine does this. How do you think this universe comes into being? It does not this divinity exhausted its transcendence by establishing itself as a universal entity, as a cosmos, and standing at the center of every individual being inside the cosmos. Every individual becomes a small cosmos, the large cosmos writ small. And so the Gnostic being is at one and the same time a genuine person here, assuming this form plastically, meaningfully, significantly, but at the same time maintains its universal stance and its transcendent poise. It expresses itself in forms that are significant, that signify some truth of its being that it wants to bring into manifestation, some seed that it wants to bring into full planthood and to fructify. And this Gnostic individual is not compelled to do this, is not bossed around by the supreme person, say, thou shalt go and do this. One lives in oneness with that, no? And so it is one's own will as well that impels towards manifestation. It isn't that the soul is an obedient servant, but is an aspect of that supreme being, joyfully entering into the conduct of the universe to conduct himself microcosmically for the good of the whole, for the all, undertaking a secret transcendent will. Why is there a universe anyway? The soul is always uncovering the reason for that. One answer leads to another. One mystery is solved and is left for us to step forward and, there's another mystery. So it is self-determined, you see, but not self with a small s, self with a large S. In the purity of self-existence, Swayambhu, self-sustained being, without ignorance, one poises oneself in the cosmos, does not get lost. Once established in the Gnostic consciousness, does not lapse into duality or error or sin, virtue, all of that stuff that belongs to the lower field. And when it participates in the universal action, it speaks the mot juste, the exact word necessary, and a word that is based on a large unity, not on division. It may be pointed. It may be the pin head of a point that pops a bubble of ignorance and delusion. But if that is necessary for the play, it can, with great justice, undertake that. The freedom of the spirit moves through nature, unblocked in the flow of supernature, because it communes with a realm of existence above what is natural to the mental being. Some flow, some glowing streams, some gleaming waters precipitate through this Gnostic being into the earth waiting below. And it moistens and brings into flower the sleeping potentials of life here. So the mind looks up and sees a greater truth. The heart, the vitality, pursue a larger goal, not for self-gratification, but for the delight in all as the divine wills. And the body, no longer a slave of instruments which are always touting their superiority, but now feels an innate partnership with this luster, which has lit everything up from the mind all the way down to its coursing bloodstream, into its marrow, to the very feet. So this light from above, as it comes through the Gnostic being into the waiting nature below, is again self-effectuating in a full awareness of the context of the universe, of the play at the moment, and executes the will of the Supreme for the good of the all. It is not looking for its own self-gratification. It is always gratified because it lives in the true self. It has nothing to want, nothing to gain, because all exists within it. Brahman is that. That is Brahman. So we would be aware, were we gifted with this Gnostic consciousness, of when we meet another who is similarly awakened. There's no guesswork. One can see the grades of evolution all through the cosmos. Who is working on what? What is the benefit to the soul behind of this guise that they are wearing now? And innately help them towards fulfillment. Sometimes by frank opposition, by destroying a form that limits, that grapples at the ankles, that doesn't permit to go. A Gnostic being is going to act for truth. Will see the truth and act upon it. Hmm? But to recognize the possibility of a Gnostic contagion moving through the world and awakening ripened souls, and that these Gnostic individuals could connect and mutually support and establish in a material frame a collective soul is one of the opportunities of our future evolution. But this Gnostic individual cannot be compelled to work in regions unprepared for it. It has to sense the necessary receptivity, a base of preparation. Still, it may not live with a group, but it may admit visitation, if you see what I mean. It will come and go. And when it comes, it brings light, something happens, and then it comes again, it comes again. The possibilities grow, and eventually other Gnostic beings catch fire and can establish that collective basis that we all look for in establishing a new world. We can't simply have illumined individuals leading the way, but we must have the power of expression in group form as well. But I'm leaving the theme of the chapter as I enter into that. So let me set that down. We'll come back to it. So a Gnostic being is universalized, lives in a cosmic awareness, but lives in transcendence as well. And in fact, centralizes as a universal individual transcendence in a brilliant point, embracing and certainly influencing even those who live around it that aren't ready to live that life. The world persists in ignorance. That doesn't mean light can't visit. That doesn't mean light can't have an impact. A preparatory advance is made. And so the Gnostic individual does not retire into some sublime, aloof hold above, but continues to move in the universe and through the universe, speaking of oneness, radiating oneness, enacting oneness, bringing harmony where it can, the flow of joy, the love of life, the possibilities of redeemed matter into actual play. The person of the Gnostic individual, like the Supreme Person, would be in flow. The Supreme is working through that one, and that one knows it, but does not have to draw attention to it. Hmm. Let's not be unrealistically optimistic about this. Disorder in life continues. And even if we achieve spiritual realization and live in the awareness, the full awareness inwardly of the Atman, of Brahman, that does not mean that there is not disorder in the mental life or the life as it has been mentalized on earth by the manifestation of mind. But that would not be natively true of the Gnostic being. The Gnostic being has passed beyond the border of the ignorance, of the fundamental division that the mind forces upon all in its dominion. This Gnostic nature begins to glow, to radiate at the levels of what Sri Aurobindo has ascertained to be the realms of a higher consciousness, higher mind, illumined mind, intuition, reaching into the overmind. These all are potential steps in the manifestation of the Gnostic being. These have, in a sense, to be attained. We have to put our foot on one, make it steady, make our poise secure there. Our asana must become steady and real. And then we proceed to another. And so on and so on. Always relating each attained height all the way back to the base of our material being, our body. And in that way, we advance the Gnostic consciousness and we grow towards the full gnosis of the supramental. When we reach those higher borders, knowledge and will are one in act and again are self-determined. If you don't mind me creating this phrase, with capital S, self-determined. We're no longer acting simply in an abstracted self, but now we're in the realm of the dynamic self. Atma Shakti works here and works truly in us. You'll remember Sri Aurobindo's work in the Veda, where he identified Rita as the ordering power of a supramental consciousness, the power of truth to order a world, to harmonize, create. You know, the word cosmos is based on an idea of harmony, superior to chaos, which is disintegration. Hmm. We prefer harmony. We prefer order. And it is Rita which characteristically dynamizes the act of the Gnostic being and is a fulfillment of real liberty. If Rita is the real idea based on reality, then liberty is based on knowing who you really are. What you are essentially, your oneness with the Supreme Person beyond, perhaps, the the vast reservoir of impersonality, hmm? But all come to a point in you, the Gnostic individual, and you represent all and each and that and the Supreme Person. So, real liberty, the cause of our action, is based on truth. It isn't that we have to fumble with error to learn what might be knowledge. No, by now we're in the essential ground of knowledge, knowledge by identity. When we see something, we recognize it as part of us. Huh. So there is no mystery. We can see that kind of sight is available to the Gnostic individual. So there is in that higher realm no error, no dark will, no falsehood. The Gnostic being has entered the truth consciousness and paces in movements of liberty and largeness. All parts of the being vibrate in oneness, from above to below. The head is not lost in the clouds. The head is cemented, is seated, if you will, in a supreme consciousness, which now rains, R-A-I-N-S, its felicity down into all the parts of the being. It percolates through every bit of us. This supramental energy, fusing knowledge and will, controls all aspects of the manifested nature until control is no longer needed. When we have been able to found all the way into the material realm the truth of our nature, then freedom is founded not only in the divine consciousness force above, but is here too. There it originates. Here we must bring it. Here we must manifest it. The Gnostic being in other grades would fulfill itself differently. We're talking about the heights far above. But here, Sri Aurobindo suggests to us that we can consider a life governed and based in higher mind, in illumined mind, in intuition, in the overmind as part or as meaningful steps into the Gnostic nature. In fact, I think we can read a little section about that, if you'll permit me. I think I'll turn, why not go straight to page 1044? Ah, at the top of the page. But in the supramental gnosis, all this luminous, immediate grasp of the truth of things, truth sense, truth vision, truth thought, would get back into its source of identity consciousness and subsist as a single body of its knowledge. The identity consciousness would lead and contain everything. It would manifest as an awareness in the very grain of the being substance, putting forth its inherent self-fulfilling force and determining itself dynamically in form of consciousness and form of action. This inherent awareness is the origin and principle of the working of supramental gnosis. It could be sufficient in itself with no need of anything to formulate or embody it, but the play of illumined vision, the play of a radiant thought, the play of all other movements of the spiritual consciousness would not be absent. There would be a free instrumentation of them for their own brilliant functioning, for a divine richness and diversity, for a manifold delight of self-manifestation, for the joy of the powers of the infinite. In the intermediate stages or degrees of the gnosis, there might be the manifestation of various and separate expressions of the aspects of the divine being in nature, a soul and life of love, a soul and life of divine light and knowledge, a soul and life of divine power and sovereign action in creation, and innumerable other forms of divine life. On the supramental height, all would be taken up into a manifold unity, a supreme integration of being and life, a fulfillment of the being in a luminous and blissful integration of its states and powers, and their satisfied dynamic action would be the sense of the Gnostic existence. So you can see he's emphasizing the all in one and all at once. So in the supramental, truth sense, truth vision, truth thought are identical in the consciousness force and subsist in a single body of knowledge, a manifold unity, a luminous and blissful integration. To be, not to know. Knowledge instrumentalizes. Knowledge is an aspect of true being, but to be, one must be. Diversity poises the one. Each diverse element is an asana in which the divine being sits. To be, to act, to love, to harmonize symphonically. This is our challenge. This would determine the Gnostic collectivity. When we've advanced to this level, we can speak meaningfully of a Gnostic collectivity, like the peacock fan, where each eye sees the other eye, and all eyes see all together, all sees each, and there's one that encompasses everything. This is the nature of the Gnostic consciousness. Living together as a single integer, expressive of oneness, of an actual and not a constructed or theorized unity. These members of a Gnostic collectivity, would draw light and energy from the supramental gnosis. Even if they've attained levels below that, still they would be irradiated from above by dint of being open, by having torn down the limiting ceiling of mind. And now they can feel that impact and reorient their life according to a larger light, greater vistas, greater powers. Now, if an individual has an impact on the environment, a collectivity like this would impact the life of ignorance and arouse here in nature, within humanity, a receptivity, would invite new orders of mental being to come into flow, to lead upwards. So, a new consummation below can emerge even prior to the arrival, let us say, of a supramental being. Gnostic preparations can be made at many levels. Bridges can be made, but there must be there not simply the felt call to ascend, but the true ascent, the change of consciousness, which means a recognition, not an idea, but a recognition of what is real. It means becoming that, to be that. Then a Gnostic life is potential. And if this series of consummations can establish something here in our material range of life, while yet we abide in ignorance, there is a rising upwards. Some may ascend to supramental heights. Some may push beyond to the doors of Satchit Ananda itself. Now, in all of this, in this evolution, as we reach the farthest stages, and the truth of being, the truth of nature, the truth of self, the truth of world is seen, felt, and lived, does inconscience disappear? Sri Aurobindo poses the question. He does not fully answer it, but he arches an eyebrow and says, does the law of struggle imposed by the secret plunge from the superconscious into the inconscious persist? Is there some secret reason that we must continue to deal with the inconscient even if we manifest a greater awareness? We have to see. We have to see. And so it remains to be seen. So that would be, I think, the balance of this chapter 27. And next week, we'll take up chapter 28, the divine life, to close the life divine. We may not do it all in one session. By now, you know well my limitations. So let me see if I can find where we can go next in Savitri. We just finished, Canto 14 in Book 2, The World's Soul. Why don't we turn the page and begin Canto 15, The Kingdoms of the Greater Knowledge. It starts on page 297. After a measureless moment of the soul, again returning to these surface fields, out of the timeless depths where he had sunk, he heard once more the slow tread of the hours. All once perceived and lived was far away. Himself was to himself his only seen. Above the witness and his universe, he stood in a realm of boundless silences, awaiting the voice that spoke and built the worlds. A light was round him wide and absolute, a diamond purity of eternal sight. A consciousness lay still, devoid of forms, free, wordless, uncoerced by sign or rule, forever content with only being and bliss. A sheer existence lived in its own peace, on the single spirit's bare and infinite ground. Out of the sphere of mind he had arisen. He had left the reign of nature's hues and shades. He dwelt in his self's colorless purity. It was a plane of undetermined spirit that could be a zero or round sum of things, a state in which all ceased and all began. All it became that figures the absolute, a high, vast peak whence spirit could see the worlds, calm's wide epiphany, wisdom's mute home, a lonely station of omniscience, a diving board of the Eternal's power, a white floor in the house of all delight. Here came the thought that passes beyond thought. Hear the still voice which our listening cannot hear, the knowledge by which the knower is the known, the love in which beloved and lover are one. All stood in an original plenitude, hushed and fulfilled before they could create the glorious dream of their universal acts. Here was engendered the spiritual birth. Here closed the finite's crawl to the infinite. A thousand roads leaped into eternity, or singing ran to meet God's veilless face. The known released him from its limiting chain. He knocked at the doors of the unknowable. Thence gazing with an immeasurable outlook, one with self's inlook into its own pure vasts, he saw the splendor of the spirit's realms, the greatness and wonder of its boundless works, the power and passion leaping from its calm, the rapture of its movement and its rest, and its fire-sweet miracle of transcendent life, the million-pointed, undivided grasp of its vision of one same stupendous all, its inexhaustible acts in a timeless time, a space that is its own infinity. Well, good to be with you. Hope to see you again soon. Much love to you all. Stay well. Be shining exemplars. I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you soon. Much love. Namaste. Jai Ma.